Okay, so when we look around at all the big global issues, climate change, health crises, is there maybe one fundamental human thing, some capacity that could be really key to our future?
That's a huge question. And yeah, maybe it's empathy.
Empathy, like going beyond just feeling bad for someone, could it actually shape how civilization moves forward?
Exactly that. There's this whole idea of an empathic civilization, suggesting that maybe underneath all the competition we see, humans are actually fundamentally built to connect and understand each other, more than we often give ourselves credit for.
That's interesting. So for this deep dive, we've been looking into that, exploring the arguments for it, checking out the psychology behind empathy in society, and even considering the other side, is empathy always good?
Right.
So the mission here is to try and grasp, how our consciousness, our awareness has evolved, maybe how empathy fits into tackling these huge global problems, and, well, what a future based more on empathy might actually look like.
A big task.
Yeah. So to start, where does this idea that we're fundamentally empathic even come from? Wasn't the old view more about, like, survival of the fittest?
It definitely was. For a long time, the emphasis was on our competitive side, our maybe more aggressive instincts. But yeah, newer thinking is pointing another way,
How so?
suggesting that humans are really at their core social creatures,
Yes.
that we're wired for empathy pretty much from birth.
Okay, that's a pretty big shift. What's the evidence? What makes us think that?
Well, one really fascinating piece came out of the 1990s, the discovery of mirror neurons.
Mirror neurons. I've heard of those. Remind me.
Yeah, so these are brain cells, right? And they fire up both when you do something like reaching for a cup and when you just watch someone else do the exact same thing.
Huh. So your brain is kind of mirroring what it sees.
Sort of, yeah. It's like an internal simulation. It helps us get a direct sense, almost, of what the other person might be experiencing or intending. You know when you see someone stub their toe and you just instinctively wince?
Oh, yeah. Definitely.
That's probably your mirror neurons giving you a little taste of that pain. It suggests we're built on a really basic level to connect with and understand others' actions and feelings.
So neurologically, we're actually set up to resonate with people. That's quite something.
It is. And it goes earlier than that, too. There are studies with really young babies, pre-verbal ones,
Mm-hmm.
and they seem to show a preference for characters or puppets that help others rather than ones that hinder them.
Really? Even babies?
Yeah, suggesting that even before culture and learning really sink in, there might be this innate preference for pro-social stuff, a kind of foundational piece of empathy already there.
Okay, but if that's true, if empathy is so fundamental, why doesn't it always feel like that? Why so much conflict, so much misunderstanding?
That's the complexity, isn't it?
Yeah.
The idea isn't that empathy is the only drive. It might be the starting point, but other things develop too, like competitiveness or even more narcissistic tendencies.
And what influences whether empathy wins out, so to speak?
Well, a lot seems to depend on early experiences, whether a child's basic needs for connection, for feeling understood and cared for, are met. If those early empathic needs aren't fulfilled, the thinking goes, then maybe these other secondary drives become stronger.
Okay. So the foundation is there, but it needs the right conditions, the right nurturing to really grow strong.
Exactly. The potential needs the environment.
Right. Now, you mentioned earlier that empathy itself has sort of evolved through history. How has our capacity for it changed as societies get bigger and more complex?
Yeah, this is a really interesting part of the story.
Mm-hmm.
If you look way back at hunter-gatherer times,
Mm-hmm.
empathy was likely much more focused, mostly within your close blood ties, your family, your immediate band. People didn't have such a strong sense of purely individual self back then, perhaps.
Mm-hmm.
So empathy might have felt more like a shared distress. If someone in your group was hurt, everyone felt it quite directly, very localized.
So survival meant sticking close, and empathy was kind of the glue for that small group.
Pretty much, yeah. Then things started changing with agriculture, and eventually the rise of big religions, theological consciousness.
Okay. How did that change empathy?
It seems to have expanded the circle.
Oh.
Suddenly you had these shared belief systems, shared stories, rituals. It created a new kind of identity, a larger us, based on faith, not just blood.
So religion created a sort of fictional family.
You could put it that way, yeah. A sense of kinship, of shared destiny with fellow believers, even people you'd never met. Empathy then extended to this wider religious community. You cared about their fate, their well-being, because they were part of your in-group.
Right. A bigger circle. What came next?
Well, fast forward quite a bit to the Industrial Revolution, the rise of the modern nation state.
Okay.
And you see another expansion. National identity becomes huge.
Hmm.
People start feeling a connection, a shared story, a sense of belonging with millions of other people simply because they're, say, French or German or American.
Even if they live hundreds of miles away and have totally different lives.
Exactly. It's an imagined community, as some have called it, built on shared language, symbols, history, education, and empathy extends to your fellow citizens. You feel pride when your nation does well, sadness when it suffers.
It's quite a journey, isn't it? From tiny bands to religious groups to whole nations, it really makes you wonder, what's the next step? Can we actually take that leap?
That's the million-dollar question, really.
Can we expand that circle of empathy to include, well, everyone, the whole human race, and maybe even beyond that to the planet itself, the biosphere?
That seems to be the challenge laid before us now. Because look at the problems we face: climate change, pandemics, the risk of nuclear conflict. These
Yeah.
are truly global issues.
Yeah, they don't respect borders.
Not at all.
Hmm.
And interestingly, they've emerged from an era defined by things that also connect us globally: electronic communication, fossil fuel energy systems that drove globalization.
Huh. So the things connecting us also created these planet-wide problems.
It's a paradox, isn't it?
Mm.
We're more interconnected than ever, technologically, economically,
No.
but that's also made us vulnerable together. And the argument is, maybe the only way to solve these shared threats is through a similarly shared sense of empathy.
Mm.
Meaning, if we could genuinely feel a connection, a sense of shared fate with people all over the world, perhaps helped by things like the internet showing us their lives, their struggles, in real time, maybe that could fuel the global cooperation we need.
So technology gives us the potential connection, but empathy is what could make it meaningful for solving problems together.
That's the hope, I think. It becomes harder to ignore suffering elsewhere or ignore the long-term impact of our actions if you feel that wider connection.
Right. Now, on the flip side, what happens when empathy is really missing? You mentioned other drives can take over.
Well, the starkest example is probably psychopathy. Individuals with strong psychopathic traits fundamentally lack that ability to see others as equals, to really feel what they feel. This allows them to exploit, manipulate, and harm others without the remorse most people would experience.
And that causes damage, obviously, in personal relationships.
Hugely. But also in workplaces, in leadership positions, even on a societal scale sometimes, it really throws into sharp relief how vital empathy is for just basic trust and ethical behavior in society.
It really does. It's like the oil in the social engine, maybe. Now, you also hear about different types of empathy. It's not just one thing.
That's a really helpful distinction, actually.
Hmm.
Usually we talk about two main kinds: cognitive empathy and affective or emotional empathy.
Okay, cognitive empathy. Yeah.
That's more about understanding.
Yeah.
It's the ability to take someone else's perspective, to figure out what they might be thinking or feeling, why they see the world the way they do, putting yourself in their mental shoes, so to speak.
Understanding their point of view intellectually.
Precisely. And then affective empathy. That's the feeling part. That's when you actually feel along with someone. You vicariously experience a bit of their joy or sadness or fear. It's that emotional resonance, that gut-level connection.
And I guess you really need both for it to be effective.
Absolutely. Cognitive empathy alone might allow you to understand someone, maybe even manipulate them better if you lack the feeling part. Affective empathy alone could be overwhelming, maybe lead to burnout if you can't step back and understand the context.
Right.
But when you combine them, understanding someone's perspective and feeling their emotion, that's where you get the strongest motivation for compassion, for helping, for positive social action. It connects the head and the heart.
And this capacity, these types of empathy, they aren't fixed, are they? Like, you're not just born with a certain amount and that's it.
Definitely not. That's the encouraging part. Empathy is much more like a skill, something that can be learned, practiced, and strengthened throughout life.
How do you do that? How do you build your empathy muscle?
Lots of ways,
Yeah.
actually. Actively trying to see things from other viewpoints is key. Consciously asking, how might they be seeing this? Reading literature can help. Stepping into characters' lives. Also, simply talking about emotions, naming them in yourself, discussing them with others. Role-playing exercises can be powerful. Even things like participating in team sports or group arts activities, where you have to coordinate and understand others non-verbally.
So it's something we can actively cultivate in ourselves and maybe even encourage in society.
For sure. And there seem to be real benefits doing so.
Like what?
Well, research links higher empathy levels to all sorts of good things. Better academic results, interestingly. Stronger critical thinking skills.
Really? Critical thinking.
Yeah, perhaps because understanding multiple perspectives helps you analyze situations more thoroughly. And of course, better mental and physical health, stronger relationships, less loneliness, more pro-social behavior, helping others, volunteering.
Okay, that all sounds great. But you sometimes hear people say empathy is a weakness, right? That it makes you too soft, maybe easily manipulated.
It's a common concern. And look, being empathetic doesn't mean abandoning critical thinking or discernment. You still need boundaries. But the counter-argument is pretty strong. Empathy isn't a weakness. It's arguably a foundation of civilization.
How so?
Because without it, where does trust come from? How do you build cooperation? Social cohesion, all the things complex societies rely on become much, much harder without a baseline level of understanding and shared feeling.
So maybe the lack of empathy is the bigger danger.
I think that's the argument. A lack of empathy can lead to indifference towards suffering. It can make people more accepting of violence or harmful policies because they just don't feel the impact on others. It erodes the social fabric.
So it's less about ditching empathy and more about developing it wisely, maybe alongside reason and ethics.
Exactly, finding that balance.
Okay, so looking ahead then, if we did manage to cultivate this wider empathy, what might this empathic civilization actually look like? How might the world be organized differently?
Well, some visions tie it to technological shifts. Imagine moving away from centralized fossil fuels towards more distributed renewable energy solar panels on every roof, local energy grids, and maybe similarly decentralized communication networks, spreading information and power more widely, not just top-down. This could foster what some call distributed capitalism, maybe less focused on massive corporations and more on local and networked collaboration.
So a move towards more local control but global connection.
Kind of. The idea is that these distributed systems could naturally foster a stronger sense of global interconnectedness because your well-being is visibly tied to the network, both technologically and perhaps socially. The ultimate goal, the big vision, is something like a biosphere-wide consciousness.
Biosphere consciousness, what does that mean?
It means valuing the health of the entire planet, the whole ecosystem, and all its inhabitants as much as we value our own individual or national success. Shifting priorities from pure competition and material gain towards overall quality of life, sustainability, collaboration.
That's a profound shift in values. It sounds idealistic. Are there any real-world examples, even tiny flashes, of that kind of empathy breaking through?
Well, one often cited, though brief, example is the Christmas truce during World War I.
Ah, yes. In the trenches.
Exactly. Amidst horrific violence, soldiers from opposing sides just stopped. They came out, shared greetings, food, songs. For a moment, their shared humanity, their basic empathy, just completely overrode the nationalistic hatred they'd been fed.
It didn't last, obviously.
No, sadly. The commanders put a stop to it. But
Yeah.
it's a powerful glimpse of that underlying human capacity for connection, even in the absolute worst circumstances. It shows it's there.
Yeah. And it makes you think about history, doesn't it? We learn so much about the wars, the conflicts, the exploitation. But maybe there's a whole parallel history, a history of empathy, of cooperation, of mutual aid, that just doesn't get highlighted as much.
That's a really important point. Maybe telling that story more often, focusing on those examples of connection, is part of how we cultivate a more empathic future. We need to see that it's possible, that it's also part of who we are.
It's like choosing which narrative about humanity we want to live by. What about larger scale things today? Could you see something like, say, the European Union as a step in that direction, trying to overcome old conflicts?
You could certainly interpret it that way. For all its flaws and challenges, the EU is an unprecedented experiment in getting nations with centuries of conflict behind them to cooperate, to build a shared identity, to prioritize peace within that bloc. It's an attempt to move beyond pure nationalism towards a kind of continental empathy, maybe.
And could that model potentially apply elsewhere? Continental unions may be becoming more important.
It's a possibility that some thinkers explore. The idea that maybe aligned with those distributed energy and communication systems we talked about, future political structures might lean more towards continental cooperation, an African Union, an Asian sphere, the Americas, Europe, fostering these larger communities of shared interest and hopefully empathy.
It feels like ultimately developing this wider empathy, this biosphere consciousness you mentioned, it's not just a nice idea anymore. It feels almost like a requirement for survival, given the global threats.
That's the urgent message, I think.
Yeah.
Climate change, potential pandemics, weapons of mass destruction. These are existential risks. There might not be a plan B if we can't learn to cooperate on a global scale.
Sure.
And deep, widespread empathy seems like a necessary ingredient for that cooperation.
Wow. Okay. So we've traced this idea of empathy from like mirror neurons in babies
Yeah.
through its historical expansion, its crucial role or lack thereof in facing modern challenges, and its potential to reshape our future world order. It really does seem like this capacity to connect is woven deeply into us.
It really does. It shaped our past, and it holds immense power for our future, whichever way we choose to direct it.
Which really brings it back to the listener, back to you. If empathy is this fundamental human thing, this potential cornerstone, how can you personally actively nurture it? How can you expand your own circle of understanding and connection in your daily life? What small steps, what little shifts in how you see others or engage with the world could maybe ripple outwards? How do we collectively foster that greater understanding the world seems to need so badly right now? That's definitely something to think about.